Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the first part thereof for the, 10th of October 2025. Quite a lot to report. Just to remind you, I am doing with Jonathan Fink a 12 hour a marathon campaign fundraiser. I won't be on the screen for 12 hours. I'll be off and on, and I'm going out tonight for a cinema excursion. So there'll be some hours where I'm missing, but it will be continuing to run, and that is going to hopefully boost our campaign fundraising and close out, if we can, our respective Car for Ukraine campaign. So check that out, starting in just an hour and a half. I need to get this done quickly. Right, 1,120 personnel lost is above 1,100. So yesterday was a busier day for both actually equipment losses in terms of traditional assets and personnel. 5 tanks and 14 troop carrying AFVs. That's more than we normally see at this point in the war. 13 artillery systems is a drop back down in that category. 70 vehicles and fuel tanks is fairly good, but it's not the 100 threshold that we have been used to. So I think an uptick in activity in certain places on the front line is worth looking at. And actually, before we go into personnel, I wonder if this is also I can't find it. No, where's it gone? Over here. No. Oh yeah, here it is. I'm actually going to pull this forward. So just because I've been talking a lot about weather recently and wondering whether weather has affected, particularly before the last couple of days, you had those huge floods in Odessa, and then we saw a downtick into the 800s in terms of personnel lost. Kriegsforscher, who is fighting on the front line, says, as I mentioned in my previous tweet, he was up in Kursk, I don't think he is now, we have terrible weather conditions, but we still managed to find an opportunity together with other units. Only for a couple of days we destroyed, over a couple of days we destroyed 4 tanks, 6 infantry fighting vehicles, 5 trucks and a pontoon bridge. That's a lot of scrap there. So I include that just because it mentions how bad the weather was, and that will affect drone usage and therefore material losses along the front line. I don't know quite what's going on here. I don't know if this is a sign that there might be some kind of mobilization in Russia. I don't really know. Max 25 and No Reports and others have reported on this. Russians are blocked from travelling abroad due to widespread rollout of electronic summonses. Residents of Moscow and other regions have begun receiving electronic summonses. Travel restrictions apply until they appear at the military registration and enlistment offices. Ignoring the summons will result in a driving ban, cancellation of tax benefits, and blocking of property transactions and denial of loans. I don't know if this is just tightening up existing mobilization numbers and requirements, and just saying, by the way, you can't, if you've been called up, you can't do all of these things, you're going to be blocked from doing that, to stop people evading the requirements that already exist, or whether this is a new wave of, I don't know, mobilization. Watch this space. Okay, yesterday there was some reporting on this. I don't know. I mean, that looks pretty horrific in terms of that. What you can see erupting from a pipeline there looks like liquid causing all this gas, and that is not nice, because this is the Togliatti Odessa ammonia pipeline. I presume what helps then to make fertilizers and whatnot. This is going to be very toxic. So the ammonia pipeline was blown up near Ruzhin Yar in Donetsk, releasing a toxic cloud hazardous to people and animals. Russia has blamed Ukraine, but Ukrainian sources say Moscow deliberately triggered the explosion to obstruct a Ukrainian offensive operations in the area. So I don't know. With the enormous volumes released, it's worse than poison gas, and it affects the entire population, flora and fauna. Putin should be destroyed as quickly as possible. We'll have to wait and see the finer details of that, and who definitely did do that, assuming it was done on purpose. Okay, A MiG-31 aircraft has crashed in Lipetsk region of Russia, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. So this has happened. It happened yesterday. Now, the MiG-31s are important because they carry the Kinzhal aeroballistic missiles, which are used to some effect in Ukraine. So the MiG-31 are used by Russia to deliver those. The crew survived, though. MiG-31 interceptor crashed on a routine flight in the Chapliginsky district of the Lipetsk region. Preliminary reports suggest that the aircraft experienced a landing gear malfunction. Actually, we have some details now from Fighter Bomber, a reliable Russian source here. The MiG-31's left main landing gear failed to deploy. The crew acted according to instructions and tried to release her by all available means, but it did not work. Landing with one main landing gear not released is prohibited. The crew, following instructions, steered the aircraft to the ejection zone and ejected safely. Naturally, they sustained injuries and are currently in the hospital. As is now tradition, the media added special effects, which are inevitable these days in the case of any plane crash. So it looks like it genuinely was a fairly, I say normal. There was nothing funky going on. Landing gear failed. You can't land a plane with all those weapons on board, probably, and all its fuel, and expect to survive. So you let the plane crash and you eject, and that appears to be what's happened with the pilots surviving. It's a twin crewed aircraft. That now, I didn't realize this, but it appears that the unmanned systems forces produce their own daily report for losses, that can sit effectively alongside the one that we normally see from the general staff. Seems as yet another attempt by Russians to attack with a large columns of mechanized equipment, says Special Khersonkat in the Unmanned Systems Forces data report for October the 9th. It stated that 8 tanks were hit, 36 IFVs were damaged, and 2 more were destroyed. So that's from yesterday. So I guess they have their own figures and metrics, and then they submit them to the general staff, and the general staff interpret them. And it may be that you'll see more IFVs tomorrow to account for the rest of them. I don't know, but the unmanned systems forces have, what we need to know is an uptick of combat asset material being destroyed over the last couple of days. And so that does fit in with the general staff figures in terms of both personnel losses and equipment losses for today and probably yesterday. I'd have to check the stats. So anyway, that's a sheet I didn't realise was produced on a daily basis. Now, Ukraine's 92nd Assault Brigade struck a Russian 91N6 radar system. So another S-400 battery is losing a radar. This is happening fairly consistently at the moment. And I think because the launch is going to be contingent on a radar, this is going to play merry havoc with Russia's ability to have consistent air defence. I don't know where this was. It's guided in by Shark UAV. That's an indigenously produced reconnaissance drone. What else do we have? The Ukraine's 413th Raid Drone Regiment is actively detecting, identifying and striking Russian drones and assets. In September alone, they destroyed 5 drones, 14 drone launch points, 10 artillery systems, 5 armoured vehicles, 2 multiple launch rocket systems or air defence units, 55 personnel and 250 shelters. I just add this is just one of many videos that you can see on a daily basis coming out. Again, it's just the idea that you've got one unit doing all of this stuff. That was done in September, and then you multiply out however many units are operating along the front lines, and you get huge amounts of equipment and personnel lost. Just the explosive, I think, capacity of these, or the payload of these drones, really has significantly increased over the course of this war. I remember seeing drones pack a limited punch initially, especially when there were IED dropping drones. Now you've got all sorts of bespoke munitions dropped from these drones. This is in the Torska-Zarichna area near Liman, where the Russians are having some success there. Ukrainians are under quite a lot of pressure. But the drone operators here from the 63rd Brigade are blowing up houses captured by assault groups to knock them out. And goodness me, these drones, just single explosion from these FPV drones, just absolutely take out entire houses. And therefore you can imagine anyone within. They do have some significant payload capability. Right. According to preliminary information from the mayor of Konotop, Russia struck a train again yesterday carrying people from Kalimanove in Chernihiv region. Details are still emerging. I haven't heard anything since I saw this. This was yesterday. But the attack appears to be yet another deliberate strike on civilian infrastructure. As I've said over the last weeks, the Russians really are ramping up strikes on critical infrastructure as well as energy. But particularly railway infrastructure. Now, I don't know what to make of this. Vitaly Kim, we don't hear much from him these days. He's the head of the Mykolaiv administration. At the beginning of the war, he was touted as like next big thing, and he was all over the media, and he's been relatively quiet actually for a couple of years now. Vitaly Kim, head of the Mykolaiv administration, confirmed that Russian forces on the occupied Kimburn Spit are only using it as a forward recon and drone post. When Ukrainian troops entered, they fled, leaving equipment behind. A larger contingent of Russian troops is concentrated more inland. This came out of nowhere, and I wonder whether you're going to see more. There have been attacks onto the Spit. I don't know about the wider peninsular area, but certainly onto the Spit. There have been attacks by Ukrainian special forces and whatnot. I've been wondering whether this is somewhere where the Ukrainians could meaningfully get a foothold. I don't know if that is the case, but this is kind of, am I hopeful they do this? Is this a good use of troops? I don't know. Put your opinion in the thread below, because sometimes I think this would be quite a sensible area to try and take, because I think it would be relatively easy to take, because it's very close. You can get your troops, you can land quite a few troops from Kyiv, which is the home of the Marines over here, and surrounding areas. But then again, it's a bit like shooting fish in a barrel, because this then becomes a small peninsula where you are kind of effectively funneling yourself, and you can only go one direction, and you have to break through this neck here. So I don't know how sensible it would be, to be honest. Right. I showed you yesterday that a factory, I think it was on fire in Novosibirsk. It was a really significant fire at that place. Then we hear there's sabotage at a solder factory in Novosibirsk. The factory was completely destroyed. Let me remind you that a real wave of sabotage at various military production facilities has already swept across Russia. The first explosions, like the one at Elastic gunpowder factory in Ryazan, where 28 people died, were attributed to explosions and their own stupidity rather than to sabotage by the Ukrainians. But judging by how quickly it all went wrong, I'm sure the puzzle will finally come together for many. Pip the results. I don't really know what the end there means, but it's an admission that there is a wave of sabotage going on at factories and deep into Russia. So that is worthy of note. Right, last night was another horrific night for the Ukrainians. You know my thoughts. I think there's an asymmetry going on at the moment, and I think Russia have an advantage. I think because they are willing and able to hit anything they like, and they have longer ranged missiles, ballistic missiles particularly, they can do much more damage to the Ukrainians. And because Ukraine is a smaller country, Russia's a much bigger country, it's just easier for Russia to say hit Kyiv and turn off the lights, which they did last night. I think we're at a pretty precarious point, and Ukraine are under an awful lot more pressure than I think many people realise. That's why I keep saying Yelabuga has to be hit. Yeah, I am quite amazed that it hasn't been hit already significantly at this point in the war. I think it should be absolutely wiped off the face of the planet, and I think NATO should be helping with that, and it just has to be done. It's just got to be done. Nights like this are unsustainable. 60% of Ukraine's gas production has now been taken out. DTEK have admitted that. That's 1.9 billion euros of gas they're having to import now because of one night of attacks the other night. And they've hit energy facilities again, and 73% of Kyiv, one of the big European capitals, was without power. This is really serious. 465 drones last night, 405 intercepted. That's 60 drones getting through. Twice as many as we've been used to, and that's been bad enough when you've had 30 drones getting through. 60 drones getting through. 2 Kinzhal air ballistic missiles sent. 1 was taken out, so 50% success rate in intercepting those most capable of Russian missiles there. 14 Iskander M or KN-23 ballistic missiles, of which 4 were taken out, so another 10 ballistic missiles. So that's 11 ballistic missiles. 9 out of the 12 Iskander K cruise missiles were intercepted, so you got 3 cruise missiles and 3 more KH-59, 69 guided aircraft missiles. So that is 6 on top of the 11. So 17 missiles getting through and 60 drones. That is an absolute nightmare for the Ukrainians last night. Anton Gerashenko sort of lists those as well, saying yet another massive drone strike and missile attack on Ukraine, which lasted all night. How sustainable is that? Yes, they've been experiencing this for 4 years, but I just think the gloves are off for Russia, and they really are going for the energy infrastructure. And so what's the difference now is I think they're getting targeting assistance from China. That's meaning that they are just going to be much more successful in all of their strikes. Kyiv, Zaporizhia, Sumy, Kyiv again, Kryvyi Rih, loads and loads of damage being done, no doubt. Update says Kyiv independent missiles, one after another. Child killed, 12 injured amid mass Russian attack on Ukrainian cities and energy infrastructure. Russia launched a large-scale drone and missile attack on Ukraine overnight, killing a 7-year-old boy in Zaporizhia, injuring at least 3 others in that city and 9 in Kyiv, while leaving parts of Ukraine's capital without power. This is what the drone, it's going to be a bad night when you have, at one point, almost 200 attack drones fired by Russia. And here's the map of the movement as of one point last night. And the idea is when you see them massing like that, it's going to be a bad night. I think there was talk last night. I think, did Tim not talk about one of the sources was like, when they're amassing with this many drones all at once here, and this is only one of the waves at night, it's going to be a really bad night. Here is a map. Massive Russian attack, lasted all night. Ukrainian energy system was a main target. Various power plants were attacked overnight, and it's going to be a very difficult winter, and it is. I think it's going to be a nightmare for Ukraine, and I think Ukraine need to be hitting big time back at Russia. We'll talk about that in a second, because there's been some rhetoric on that, but actually there were no strikes really that I'm aware of last night into Russia. And yet here we have Kyiv, Kharkiv, Poltava, again, Dnipro, Zaporizhia. I don't know where that is. Is that not? No, that's that one. Can't tell there. And then another place further to the southeast of Kyiv as well. So an awful lot of drones and missiles. Ukraine's foreign ministers picked up on this kind of sentiment, likening Russia's strike to attempted genocide. Again, the world will struggle, not do much. Some more statements, some actions, some sanctions, some generators, a band-aid on a gaping wound. Stop all trade with terrorists now, says Tim White. Andriy Spiha, Russian terrorists struck critical civilian infrastructure, particularly energy, across Ukraine with hundreds of drones and missiles. I urge all partners to respond strongly. Putin did this on October the 10th, the anniversary of the first massive attack on Ukraine's energy infrastructure in 2022. This is a deliberate demonstration that he has not changed his aggressive actions, terrorist methods and ultimatums in 3 years, and continues to reject any meaningful diplomacy and peace efforts. Russia is worse than Hamas. Even Hamas has agreed to a ceasefire and peace efforts. To the contrary, Moscow continues the senseless war it began, a war it cannot and will not win. As a result of the massive strike, a 7-year-old boy was killed in Zaporizhia. Dozens more civilians have been injured across the country. In Kyiv, Kharkiv, Poltava, Zaporizhia, Dnipro and other regions, many people remain without power following Russia's strikes on civilian energy objects. Our energy workers are true heroes who are now working to restore power, but we also require increased energy assistance from our partners. Depriving people of energy amid dropping autumn temperatures amounts to genocide under Article 2C of the Genocide Convention, creating unbearable conditions of life in order to destroy a national group. Pressure on Moscow is the only recipe that can work, but it needs to be strong and consolidated. Economic pressure of biting sanctions, military pressure of stronger support for Ukraine and political pressure of full isolation. Putin must feel that the cost of continuing the war exceeds the cost of stopping it. He must feel that continuing this war endangers his regime. I wonder whether official labels of genocide would help here, and surely that's doable. It's certainly happening. Several thermal power plants were hit last night in the latest Russian attack, with critical equipment damaged. According to DTEK, the energy company, repair crews have already begun restoration work, but the scale of damage is significant. It is just not good news. Here's some image of this is a helicopter, I think a Mi-8 with is this the one with that machine gun cone at the front of the helicopter? It does mean they have to get quite close to the drone, and it does worry me that they'd get some shrapnel. We have had a couple of jets lost due to drone debris, but this is from above the drone to some degree, so they obviously know what they're doing, blowing up that drone as it flies. So there is that. What else do we have? Scenes from Brovary, I don't know whether Brovary is a correct pronunciation, but yeah, lots of fire there. That's routinely hit as a suburb of Kyiv. A blackout in Kyiv. The goal is to push Ukrainians into darkness, says Anton Gerashenko, with no electricity, water and heating. This is genocide and terrorism. So again, mentioning the genocide idea, and here you can see the darkness. 73% of Kyiv is in blackout after Russia's drone attack, says Jason J. Smart. The drones flew just 200 meters above the city. This is the moment the electricity went out. Indeed, there are plenty of images of Kyiv plunged into darkness here. You can see a major capital like this in that much darkness tells you something's wrong there, of course. Kyiv remains under attack, under an air raid warning, said Tim White last night, as he took us through what was going on as it was happening. Air defense has just shot down another in the capital, etc., etc. And you can, as I advise you to do, check out his daily threads. His one from last night showed you that the sound of the drones was really, as he said here, everything sounds louder because there are lower clouds that trap the sound, but also because shoot downs are happening lower and the drones themselves are flying low. So 200 meters just above the ground. It's likely to be one of the low altitude takedowns, he says, of one with a lot of sound in it. I won't play the sound because I get into trouble with YouTube. But yeah, Krasnodar was the only Russian airport that was closed down last night, and we have very little information of anything that took place inside Russia. Here we have an apartment block in Kyiv that was taken out. I presume that's the apartment block here, the one that we see in daylight with a big gaping hole in the side and extensive fire damage. But yeah, lots and lots of imagery that came out last night, including from Zaporizhia. And then we had Dnipro as well being struck. So I'm not going to show you reams and reams of the evidence here, but there is plenty of footage and imagery of the destruction across Ukraine. Tim White says, as I reported last night, the town of Brovary near Kyiv was hit with a mini market completely destroyed. In addition, 3-story, multi-story buildings for food stalls, 2 cars also damaged, siren sounding. There were no injuries though, which is pretty miraculous. What's also worrying is that guided glide bombs are now have such a range that they're starting to hit Dnipro, the city. There's a worrying development, says again Tim White, in Dnipro this afternoon, yesterday that being, where an aerial bomb has reached the city for the first time. This glide bomb exploded soon after it was filmed. After the explosion, a column of smoke was clearly visible in Dnipro. And then we have this also from Dnipro. This is a Russian drone that was shot down over Dnipro that had the words "Hochos, hang yourselves," and for Belgorod. So the idea that they have hit, the Ukrainians themselves have hit energy infrastructure in Belgorod recently has led the Russians to kind of do a retaliatory strike. Now, of course, if you're talking about genocide and connecting that to attacks on energy infrastructure, what does it mean when Ukraine are striking these same sorts of targets? Now, they're not doing it in such a widespread manner. It only appears to be sort of Belgorod and Kursk that have suffered. Kursk region. But I don't know if that kind of takes the wind out of their own sails in terms of accusing Russia. It looks like just a scene from hell here. Russians are carpet bombing a residential neighborhood in Zaporizhia. That was the night of the 8th, so that's 2 nights ago. I can't confirm where that is, but it appears horrific. Looks like cluster bombs being used in residential neighborhoods. Just horrific there. Scenes from Zaporizhia. Really, really horrible. Now, rhetorically, Zelensky has said that Ukraine is scaling up long-range strikes. Interesting, there were none last night, or none that we know of, with clear plans for increased use of missiles and drones in the coming months. Precision attacks are growing in quality and scale, aimed at pushing Russia toward peace. He emphasised Ukraine's goal is not war for its own sake, but to end it. So there's some big talk coming from Zelensky, like, just you wait, you're going to see it in the coming months. Yeah, I mean, we have seen an uptick in some strikes and the weapons used in terms of their capabilities. My opinion is that Ukraine absolutely needs to be ramping up strikes massively. At the moment, there is an asymmetry, and the advantage lies with Russia. If they can every so often do these waves of 500 drones and 30 odd missiles, Ukraine need to be doing that, but they need to be multiplying that. Ukraine need to be doubling that. Just like drones. Whatever the enemy is doing, you need to be doing it better and more. Just now, Ukrainian drones targeted Russian oil depot in Matviv, Kurgan in Rostov region. So this was yesterday during the daytime. So this is an oil depot. It's a bit confusing though, because there are various claims coming out here. Ukrainian drone strike reportedly hit an oil depot in Matviv, Kurgan. According to local reports, prior to the impact, monitoring channels had warned of drone threats in the area. There was also a claim, so that's it from One Direction. And yeah, there are claims that a fuel and lubricants train is on fire. I don't know if that is the same incident as that, or whether there are two incidents there. There are claims of oil depot being hit, and there's a claim of a train being hit as well. Now, Feodosia, this was yesterday though, was apparently still burning the oil depot there. One fuel tank can be seen completely burned out, and it had apparently caught fire, had gone from one fuel tank to another. I don't know if that still is an issue, or whether that's now been put out. And there are claims from Russians that part of a Flamingo missile have been found somewhere inside Russia. I don't know exactly where this is, but the claim is, oh, that's a great picture. Oh, yeah, not sure we're getting an awful lot from those other ones. Yeah. For some reason, it's not rendering correctly, but you can see they're pretty sizable fuselage, which would fit in with the FP5, the Flamingo missile. Right, okay, moving on to other bits and pieces, not too much in this section today. First of all, we're going to go to the European Parliament that's urging EU states to let Ukraine strike military targets across Russia with Western weapons. Most EU states allow border strikes, but deeper attacks remain prohibited, forcing Ukraine to rely on domestic long-range systems. This is what we want to see, which is Ukraine having permission to strike deep within Russia with whatever it's given by whomsoever gives them those missiles. And the European Parliament there trying to address the asymmetrical situation where Russia are able to throw whatever they want inside Ukraine, and Ukraine is still kind of constrained by regulations concerning the weapons they can use and how they use them. Reuters reports that Russia's industrial titans are furloughing workers as its war economy stalls. This is what we want to hear. Cutting costs, firms aim to trim work days and not jobs. We've seen this before across many different sectors. Going down to 4-day working week is really, really revealing. Railway, construction, auto and mining sectors are affected. The move highlights pressure on Russia's war economy, and non-military sectors shrank 5.4% since January. So you're having a lot of sectors then reducing people to a 4-day working week. Semros, Russia's biggest cement maker, has moved to a 4-day week. We've heard this with, I think, railways, as well as other sectors too. This is to preserve the staff amid a sharp downturn in construction industry and a rise in cement imports. This is a necessary anti-crisis measure, said Semros spokesman Sergei Koshkin. The goal is to keep all our staff. The company has 13,000 employees in 18 plants across Russia. Koshkin said increased imports from countries including China, Iran and Belarus, combined with a drop in new houses being built, had curbed demand for cement. Semros expects Russia to consume less than 60 million tons of cement this year, a figure last seen during the COVID pandemic. Now, the problem is, like I was talking about with some economic discussion yesterday, when the US puts up these massive tariffs to pretty much everyone, then people are scrabbling around for new markets to sell their stuff to as cheaply as they can, I guess, to kind of get rid of a glut that they might have. So China, for example, we've heard about steel, but it could be the same with cement, which is, okay, we can't sell our cement that we were selling to the US because they've whacked up 50% tariffs or whatever. So we're now going to offload that cement that used to go to the US cheaply into Russia, and then that really affects Russia's own cement industry. This is why Europe has just put on steel tariffs to protect their own steel industry, which is screwing over the UK, partly because of Chinese imports of cheap government propped up steel, right? So they put, what's going to happen is the US's tariff predilection for tariffs and Trump's desire to start these trade wars and use tariffs in the way he is using them will just mean everyone's going to use tariffs on everyone. You're going to see, I think, a contagion of barriers to entry put up in all sorts of markets all over the world. Now, in this particular case, this is going to hurt Russia in the same way that, you know, our steel industry in the UK is going to be hammered now and might not survive, right? Which is a bad thing as far as I'm concerned as a British citizen. But if Russia's cement industry goes under, hey, I'm fine with that. Now, Russia's federal budget revenues have fallen below last year's level. In September, revenues fell by 1.2% year on year. In real terms, revenues fell by 10%. This is a disaster. Even inflation couldn't save them, says Evgen Istrubin. Oil and gas revenues fell by, so you can check all these sort of graphs out and whatnot. Next one here, oil and gas revenues fell by 25% in September. Non-oil and gas revenues fell by only 6%, the smallest increase in 15, grew by only 6%. So non-oil and gas revenues grew by only 6%, the smallest increase in 15 months, was the claim there. The economy is beginning to collapse and industry is deteriorating. So that 6% rise in non-oil and gas revenues is the lowest since all the way back here in June 2024. That's going to be propped up by sort of government expenditure, I would have thought, on the defence industry and so on and so forth. But oil and gas revenues going down and down. Although a slight improvement from the month before in September, it is not looking good. That's minus 25% year on year. Budget expenditures grew by only 6% in September compared to 20% in previous months. Moscow is running out of money to finance a war. Spending has to be drastically cut. So that's a precipitous drop from the month before in terms of expenditure. The budget surplus in September was only 406 billion rubles compared to 606 billion rubles last year. The sharp drop in revenues resulted in a 1/3 reduction in the surplus compared to last year. September is always a surplus month in Russia. So that's worth noting. But it was a surplus month still, but a very low surplus month. January to December, revenue plus 2.5%, non-oil and gas revenue minus 20.6%, non-oil and gas. Don't know why there are two for the same there. Expenses plus 19.5%, deficits minus 3,787. I presume billion rubles, whereas last year it was 578 billion ruble surplus. So revenue is not growing, is what's claimed there. This is kind of done in note form, so it's difficult to often get my head around fully. Russia's income continues to decline. Continuing the war will lead to default or hyperinflation. I hope there's a repeat of 1991, says Istrabin here. The figures are not looking good. And there are so many indicators of this, as we've talked about already. Furloughing, for example, is another indicator. The US proposes banning Chinese airlines from flying over Russia, according to Reuters. The Trump administration has proposed restricting Chinese airlines from flying over Russia on flights to and from the US. In other words, you're not allowed to fly from the US if you fly over Russia, and you're not allowed to fly to, because you are conveying an advantage by doing so, because you're allowed to fly over Russia and American planes aren't, and that is an unfair competitive advantage. This creates an unfair competitive advantage by reducing flight times and fuel costs, which are one of the biggest costs, right? They are the biggest costs for these planes. And so I can understand the US wanting to do that. Now, pretty bombastic claim here from Matthew Whitaker, US permanent representative to NATO. He said, if you had a snail start from the border of Russia and Ukraine and continue for the last 3.5 years, it would now be in Poland. And the Russian army, are not even 20% into the country. In other words, the Russians are moving at a pace slower than a snail on a daily basis. So I think that demonstrates just sort of how ineffective, inept, incompetent the Russian military has proven on the battlefield. We need to prepare because they're reckless. They are certainly, as someone wants to describe them, as a gas station with nuclear weapons. Russia strongly reacted to several things. The discussion about the Tomahawks, the French taking the Shadow Fleet ship, the President Trump calling Russia a paper tiger. Well, they spent a day trying to convince us they're a bear, right? And I think bears don't have to convince you they're bears. That's a really good point, actually. That was it Peskov and Medvedev, straight after Trump called them paper tigers, said actually we're bears, and we're not paper bears, we're real bears. And you know, the more time you spend convincing us that you're a bear, the less time you really appear to be naturally a bear. Anyway, pretty good rhetoric. I'd like to see more of that from the Americans. That's enough from me. Please pop in to the Car for Ukraine 12-hour marathon live stream, co-streamed with Jonathan Fink from Silicon Curtain, which is now going to be starting in 45 minutes. Better get going. Take care. Doodle pips.